Ruben Swartz, your host and chief nerd. Welcome to Sales for Nerds, the podcast for people who love using their expertise to serve clients but maybe aren't quite so enthusiastic about the sales and marketing aspects of the business. I struggled with this for years, ironically, as a sales and marketing consultant to the Fortune 500. Over time, I realized that there was a more effective, more authentic way to get clients by helping instead of selling, teaching instead of marketing, and connecting instead of networking. My mission is to help you learn the easy way instead of the way I learned it, by sharing my stories, by bringing on awesome guests to share their stories. And of course, as a software guy, I had to go and create the CRM I wished I'd had when I was struggling with more traditional systems. It does more of what us solo consultants need, help us nail our positioning, help us get more leads and conversations off our website, get more referrals, have more conversations, automates proposals all the way through to e-signature and more, and less of the bloat that comes with traditional CRMs. If you want to check it out, you can start a free trial at mimiran.com. That's MIMIRAN.com. And you can even just sign up for the free version, which helps you nail your positioning. And you can also find proposal templates, lead magnet ideas, and more. Once again, that's MIMIRAN.com. Now let's get to it. All right, today I'm super excited to have with me Doug Brown, who has led award-winning and high-performance teams, and he's also pioneered profitable development programs for companies. He's worked with folks like Intuit, CBS, Procter & Gamble, Enterprise Rent-A-Car, Embassy Suites, Inc. 500 and 5,000 companies, and thousands of other small businesses and entrepreneurs. He's been working literally since he was like 4 years old with his family business, and he's gone on to found or build over 24 businesses. He's worked for multi-billion-dollar giants. He's won sales awards. He's also built his own business, and he works now with helping smaller businesses become large businesses. Is that fair, Doug? Did I get that right?
Yeah, there's two focuses. Well, firstly, you make me sound a lot pretty important, so thanks so much. So there's two focuses. I work with companies traditionally that are wanting to expand and, technically 5 million and up. However, I do work with a lot of smaller and businesses than that to help them expand their revenues and improve their sales.
All right, awesome. Today, Doug's going to talk to us a little bit about common mistakes that people make when they start up their sales, quote unquote, process. But before we get into that, I've got some rural Eagle Creek Pinot Noir from Mendocino County. This is one of my Costco specials. It's like, I don't know, $12, $15 or something like that. It's got some nice cherry flavor, not too much, not too little. Perfect thing for a Sales for Nerds interview. And Doug is going in a slightly different direction today. Tell us what you've got in your bottle, Doug.
I have a Nature's Promise spring water bottle. And the reason behind that is I'm actually allergic to alcohol of wine, beer, or any hard liquor. So I would love to join you for a glass of wine. I would start sneezing and be hungover for 4 days. So it's probably not the best thing.
It's not worth it. So Doug is our designated podcaster today, just in case I get off the rails. You literally started in the family business before you started school. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. At the age of 3.
So what did you do?
So at the age of 3, I basically swept floors and did a lot of cleanup around my father's business. And I got paid a whopping sum of 25 cents a week. And it was great because I was the most popular kid on, penny candy day at the end of the week, right? My friends and I would go down and we'd be able to pretty much clean up with 25 cents. So, but that's how I started. It was literally ground floor up, sweeping floors.
And what was the business?
My father had an electric motor machinery repair company. So we repaired industrial equipment, just, things from smaller stuff to like huge stuff that you'd find in, multiple rooms and factories. And we used to go in and troubleshoot and fix it. Anything. I mean, my dad was pretty much a genius when it came to fixing electrical type of equipment. But, and we used to do things, even like amusement rides, that they had the electric motors on. And I love that because I got to ride all those rides for free at that time.
Right. So you were living larger than anyone else on a 25 cent a week salary, pretty much.
I was at 3 years old and 4 years old, right? So, and then, then I did get an allowance on top of that. So, I usually had a couple of dollars on every Friday to go down and sugar myself out.
Now, not everyone who starts off sweeping floors gets bitten by the entrepreneurial bug. What happened after that that led you down this path?
Working in an environment where I saw people, having freedom of choice really appealed to me. Somewhere around the age of 5.5 or so, we graduated from certain things. We would do floors, and then we would do, pulling wire out of motors and selling the copper, with my father. Every Christmas we'd take, my dad had this huge truck, and we'd load it up with copper and other precious, other metals. And we would go down and we literally would sell it to the scrap yards, but they paid us in cash and I would get a percentage of it for pulling the motors. So, it was when you're 5, 6 years old, I mean, getting a couple $100 for your efforts is a big deal at that point. So that taught me the power of leverage. So I could work for 25 cents an hour, or I could work for X amount of hours over a period of time and, get paid far more than at 25 cents an hour. So, but by the time I was 5.5, I don't know if this was just by design or they needed additional labor, but I would literally be thrust out in front of the clients, and I had to learn how to communicate and sell, bringing in their equipment as well as looking up parts and pricing out parts. And I would see things like, okay, we're getting a 2-to-1 markup or a 4-to-1 markup or whatever on a part. So in my brain, I think what happened was, this is a much better way than just trading myself for hours, for dollars, and being able to make X amount of profit. So that was part of it. My mother also was entrepreneurial because, out of survival. I mean, we had a lot of kids. We had four kids, and then we had pretty much every family that my parents wanted to support. So my mom used to sell Avon back in the 70s. This is how old I am. Well, even the late 60s. And so she would travel around and I would travel around with her. So I worked with my dad in the day, I worked with my mom at night. And the thing I loved about the Avon business, was being able to figure out the commissions at the end. So my mom, you had a cost, you had an expense to that, and then you had a sale price. And watching my mom do whatever she did, and she was doing pretty well. I mean, she was making like 15 grand a year selling Avon back in the late 60s. That wasn't bad, actually. And she was a nurse by day and an Avon lady by night. So that's kind of what caught, I think, my interest in it.
Okay. So you're 5 years old at this point?
Yeah, 5, 6. I mean,
So if we didn't have that, are we doomed? If we didn't have that
no,
entrepreneurial, okay, just checking.
no.
So what happens next? What happens when you get out into the world and you've decided already, I imagine, okay, I like this entrepreneurial business. I like the leverage. I like getting paid based on the results and not just on my time.
So when I got into out of the world of school, like, out of high school or something like that, or
Yeah, what happened next? What's the next stop on the journey?
so, like anyone of my generation, you had to go to college. I mean, you're not that smart unless you go to college. That was the perception, right? I've learned that not to be true. I've learned, people who are making millions of dollars never went to college. However, for me, it was like that was the traditional family growing up. So after I got out of high school, I wanted to go to college, but we really, my parents weren't going to pay for it. So I went into the Army basically for the educational experience. And so I spent lots of years in the Army, 12 years and 7 days in total. And,
Not that you're counting.
no, I actually was, because I counted the day I wanted to get out, right? So, but I was able to afford school, and went through school. But as I was going through school, I was always constantly building businesses. And the thing is I was selling music equipment also, in addition to building side businesses while I was in college. And when I got out of college, what really shocked me was I was selling music equipment to bands, like, bands that we listen to on the radio. I mean, sometimes very big bands like Aerosmith and those type of bands. And when I got out of college and I had 2 degrees, one in the medical, one biology, one in nuclear medicine, I went to go get a job in nuclear medicine, and I quickly found out that my sales job selling music equipment paid a lot more money than the hospital would actually pay me to come there. So that was quite the shock, because even with military benefits, I had 20,000 in loans. So I was like, okay, now what am I going to do? Well, I went back into sales and tripled my income that I would have had in the hospital, within my first year.
Well, I want to talk about that, but just for a second, go back to the Army. One of the things you mentioned really liking about entrepreneurship was the freedom and the control over your life. How did that play out when you were in the Army and you don't have that degree of freedom?
Good question. So, in the Army, you actually do have an ability to have some entrepreneurial freedom. And if you're able to show that in a way that fits the system, if you will, then you generally have more success. So I was quickly promoted. I was like what they call an E5 or sergeant within my first 14 months. So they rapidly promoted me through the ranks, and then they wanted to send me to officers school after that. But if you don't know how to work the system in the military, it could be very restrictive, right? Because you're cast into a certain place, and then you might get stuck there, right? I mean, I know people get stuck. I was in the artillery for a long time. I know people got stuck there for 6 years.
How do you work the system so that you get promoted really quick?
So you're selling and promoting yourself. You're selling and showcasing your talents. It's no place to to be have humility and a great deal. So it's what I would call, and I borrowed this term from a man named Alan Weiss, shameless promotion, right? So you're constantly promoting your own self-worth, and just like we would in sales, we want to make multiple sales. We don't want to just have a one-time sale. We, if we want to be successful and have leverage. So I would sell the non-commissioned officers, the lower officers, I'd be hanging out with the colonels and generals, and promoting myself basically through the process.
Well, how do you do that without sounding like some jerk promoting himself?
A lot of people in business, even today, they ask that same question. So the reality is that there's a difference between promotion and arrogance. So, promotion is truthful, and you're bringing it to the edge. So, shameless promotion, you're bringing it to the edge. So, you could say to somebody, for example, I drive a Mercedes, right? And that's maybe for some people, or pick any high-end brand. I drive a, a Lamborghini, right? Or you could say something like, I drive a 12-year-old Lamborghini or a 25-year-old Lamborghini, right? They're both the same truth, but one is more promotional, that puts you in a more positive light, depending on who you're talking with. And the other would be considered, kind of it's truthful, but it's not going to give you the same type of mileage when you're speaking to somebody. So in the Army, I would innovate and come up with ideas and then promote those ideas, as well as attaching them to myself. And so what quickly happened was I was getting notoriety from, the upper ranks, and the upper ranks were saying, hey, listen, let's move this guy along the path. And so that's what happened. So, even in business today, I always teach people, don't lie, but tell the truth. But you don't have to like put yourself in a position where it's a negative, even if it's a positive. And most people really don't care whether it's a 12-year-old car or, it's just the brand, right? So that's how I did it in the Army, especially.
So you came up with ideas that were helpful to people, and you made sure that people knew that you came up with them.
Yeah, exactly. Like, when we were in the artillery, we used to use slide rules to calculate the distance that the artillery round would go, and the wind drift and all this other stuff. And I'd bring up like, hey, why don't we use calculators to do this? Right? It's something simple. Like, oh, we don't have budget for calculators. Well, you know what? We can go get them at Radio Shack at that time when the company was, around, right? So, oh, what's that going to cost? No, not much, but we could go out and we could actually raise the money. We don't even have to come out of pocket for this. We could raise the money through private, funding. They want to support the military, and then, we can give them a little bit of notoriety on what we're doing, and, just basic stuff. And so, things like that, when you're in such a structured system, a lot of times thinking out of the box, people want to do it, but they're afraid to do it. And so I was just never afraid to do it, because I always looked at it as, hey, I just want to accomplish the mission, do it as in the most efficient and effective way possible.
Okay. And side note, Alan Weiss, great author, $1 Million Consulting, I think was his seminal book, right? Great book. I've got it back here on the shelf somewhere. Check it out. We'll put a link in the show notes. Okay. So now you've decided I've got this college degree and I can go use it in nuclear medicine, or I can go sell stuff, which makes me a lot more money. So I'm going to do that.
Right.
And are you still selling the music equipment at this point?
So what ended up happening is I went to get, I had almost 8 years worth of college. So I was desperately trying to get a job in my chosen field.
Right.
Right. I wanted that to work. But the reality is I sent out, I think it was 307 resumes across the United States. I got 3 responses. And I did get one job in Tennessee, and the week before I was supposed to go out, they had budget cuts, so they shut down the nuclear medicine program. So I ended up taking an emergency call at some of the local hospitals, but they were only paying a mere $13 an hour at that time, and I was making almost $40,000 a year just selling music equipment, which was an awesome job, by the way. I loved it. And so, my entrepreneurial brain was kicking in and saying, listen, this is not a good form of leverage. So I took part-time call at the hospital to keep my license alive. And I decided I'm going to go into a different type of sales. And so what I ended up doing is going into telecommunication sales. And I worked for a couple of companies selling to get to know the ropes. And, within my first year, I literally was tripling plus my income. I think I made 91,000 that first year going into telecom. So, you run the numbers against $13 an hour. That's quite a difference. And then the next year, I was on track to do a multi-six figure. And, and so again, it's always about leverage for me when I look at, how do I help other companies even do what they want to do, but create more money. So that's how it kind of transitioned.
So the problem I have with these interviews, right? There's so much cool stuff, and it's like I want to go forward and get to some other things, but I also want to go back and learn about like how do you make the good money selling music equipment to Aerosmith? I mean, it sounds like it should be possible, but I don't understand the mechanics. Like, are you in a music store? How does that all work?
So just like any company, like if you look at Guitar Center today, which is probably one of the premier music stores out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
They have their incoming clientele. And then if you're entrepreneurial or sales, I'll call it sales minded, you also go outbound. And this is the difference between somebody who makes, I think back then, I mean, we're talking back in the 80s, early 80s, right? So, the difference between somebody who made $25,000 a year or somebody like myself who made $40,000 to $50,000 a year was going outbound. So I would call upon schools, I would call upon universities, I would call upon, I would find out who was in what band, and I would call upon them and then ask them for referrals to other people. And that's how you get to the bigger names, right? So, I mean, just some of my personal clientele was, the band Boston, the band Extreme, Aerosmith, Billy Joel's part of their bands. My God, the Eagles. We had some of the, Joe Walsh and those guys. So, once you start networking in that, it's sales. Once you start networking in certain circles and you do the right thing by people, they will then refer you to their own inner circle. When you start getting up on that level, it was, pretty powerful. In fact, I ended up going to Berklee College of Music from that experience. And the reason I did is because Brad Delph from Boston and a couple of the other, Barry Goodrow and those guys, they were like, hey, you're not a bad musician. And so I said, well, you think I can make it into music school? And they said, sure. And I'm like, well, I might as well apply to one of the hardest music schools to get into. So I did, and they accepted me. But yeah, so it's just basics. The challenge with most businesses in general is they don't try to go outbound enough. They're constantly relying upon one or two methods to try to bring inbound leads, which is nothing wrong with that. But when you go outbound, you separate yourself from everybody else.
Okay, great. By the way, what instrument or instruments do you play?
I was a vocalist, believe it or not, and you can't, I at one time I had hair that was, way down past my shoulders. Not today, obviously. So I was a vocalist and I played keyboards, and I was really bad at guitar, but I could also play some of that too.
So we have some musical overlap too, because I'm really bad at guitar.
Oh,
But that's about it.
We ought to form a two guys bad band,
There you go. All right. So now you're in telecom. Things are taking off. Now what happens?
So I got to telecom where I was literally the number one representative in the company, selling. I was outselling, I was in little old New Hampshire, and I was outselling the whole team in New Hampshire, the whole teams, two teams in Massachusetts, the team in Rhode Island, the team in Connecticut, all combined, right? So it was like I was just killing it.
So what were you doing differently?
I was going outbound, but I wasn't just going outbound to clients. I was going outbound to relationships who could bring me clients. So, for example, there would be people who sold telephone systems, but they didn't sell the actual phone service. So what I would do is I would go there and say, hey, look, I can get you paid on the phone service. Would you like to form a partnership? And the thing is some of these we used to call them phone vendors. I mean, they've been in business for 25, 30 years. They have a Rolodex of people who trust them because they've been with them forever. So as soon as we got by the first few clients, they would start to open up their Rolodex. And, so
basically you had to show that you were going to make them look good.
Yes, Ruben. And the way that I did that was I would go in and I'd say, look, I understand your client base is your gold. I don't want your whole client base, especially in the beginning. Even if you gave it to me, I would turn it down. So it's kind of a negative sell, if you will. But it was truthful. So what I would say to them was, what I want to do, if you're agreeable, is let's take one client. Let's do a test case. Let me prove to you how good we really are. And then if that works, let's not open up your base. Let's take another client. Let me prove that. Let me do that 4 or 5 times for you. And then if you feel more comfortable, let's talk about a larger strategy on how to get X amount of dollars coming into your life, recurring revenue. And they'd love that because, I had some guys that were making, almost $10,000 a month recurring revenue after we got done with their clients. So, so that would be the thing, when I was going out, I wasn't looking to take it all. I was looking just to establish a relationship. And then, so, after having 6 to 10 of those guys and gals, I was starting to generate 62 incoming calls a day from clientele. So that's how it grew. And, I was on track the year I left, and I decided to leave because I wanted to start my own thing. Because I recognized, hey, if I was doing this for myself, I was on track to do 450,000 in commissions and salary that year. But I realized on my own, I could do far more. And, I also didn't have to go into an office and play the politics, which I just didn't care for.
All right. So now you're starting your own business. What happens next?
Oh, I learned some hard lessons. So I built my business up to about $1,500 a month. I had 2 little kids in diapers, and I was going to go take the world on, right? So I put up $60,000 of my own money. I had some partners that wanted to come in. We made the break, and I went to work. And then what I realized is you should have really clear agreements with partners. So within 4 months, We were still making $1,500 a month. My $60,000 was gone, and all my partners were gone. So they went off to pursue. One guy ran off with a gal, and I don't even know where he is today. I think he married her. Another guy wanted to, work around his house. The other person wanted to go online marketing. So basically, 4 months later, I'm making $1,500 a month. I'm the only person bringing in any income into the household. And so I was kind of like, oh, well, like a lot of entrepreneurs, what do I do next, right? How do I overcome this or adapt, or, do I go back to, paid prison at that point? Right? That's how I felt. And so I made the decision to stick it out because of a relationship that I had actually built with a guy named Jay Levinson. Jay Conrad Levinson he had a series of books called Guerrilla Marketing.
Mm-hmm.
So I was actually helping his nephew and Jay with their business. And I had always been kind of coaching because part of sales is coaching from my perspective. And Jay introduced me to a training, and he said, I think you could benefit from this. And it was from a man named Chet Holmes. And so, Chet wrote this book called The Ultimate Sales Machine, great book. And he built a course around it. So I took the course, and I was like, I think I can probably make this work. But the crazy part was, it was like almost, it was $4,000 at the time. And I'm like, I just lost 60,000. I have no money coming in, $1,500 a month. I have 2 little kids, a wife, the whole bit. So what am I going to do? And I basically said to myself, well, I've done dumber things than this in my life. So I took my credit card out and I went full tilt, and I applied everything in that course I could. And that business went from making $1,500 a month to, within 15 months, making almost $1 million. It was 998,500.
Okay. So this is really cool, but I'm curious because it sounded like you had a strategy that worked in the music business, it worked at the telecom business, but it somehow didn't work when you started on your own. How come you couldn't take that same strategy? And then what did you learn from Chet that let you get back to accelerating growth?
So I think part of when you're working a job for somebody else, there's a defined mission, right? So, you're working, you understand what the outcome's supposed to be. And then when you go on your own, you still have that same thing, but in my case, I had partners that I was relying on for them to do their part. And I ended up having to do their part and everything else. So it was just, for that 4-month period, it was very, very confusing on what the role was supposed to be for Doug. Once I kind of got out of that and I started looking at the Chet Holmes thing, what I realized is something I already knew intuitively but wasn't practicing. It's all about sales, right? Sales, having money and not having money, money doesn't make people happier, but it does make, I'll quote Tony Robbins, you can arrive at your problems in style, right? So what I learned from Chet's was, okay, I have all of the things that I need. I now just need to get back to work, and instead of just tactically looking at things, strategically playing them. So, okay, what are the multiple outcomes that I want from every single thing I'm doing? And so I started applying that concept, and I started going back to the basics of, okay, look, I have relationships with vendors. I can go back to them. I have, past clientele. I have all of this stuff that I wasn't doing because I was focused on trying to build a business before I even got the business successful or stable. So I was trying to scale the thing before I even got it stable, which is a mistake for a lot of companies. In fact, I would say for most companies.
Okay. So now you got this thing rocketing up.
Mm-hmm.
And then what?
So then I ended up building the company up to a place where I had locked in contracts for 3 years to 5 years with people. So I was getting paid regardless whether I was going to work or not. But what I realized through that whole process, and sometimes we have to do things to figure out what we don't want, is even though I had $1 million company, a 7-figure company, I really didn't like the industry. I didn't like what I was doing. So what ended up happening was, as I was going through this Chet Holmes program, I was like, man, you know what? This is pretty cool. I actually called their president of coaching and said, I'd like to start coaching for you people. I'm a testament to your program works. I really think I could do well as a coach. And so this step back, there was a company called Coach University, and I was actually helping them with their telecommunications, and they actually told me I'd be a good coach. So that's kind of what inspired me to do this. So they said yes. And so I started applying all the sales strategies that I was using, not only in the telecom business and other businesses that I had or the sales career, but I started applying those to coaching. And within 6 months, I was their number one grossing coach. I was doing almost $1 million a year just in coaching. And that got people's attention. So now I had a business doing, 7 figures. Now I had a coaching practice that was doing almost 7 figures. So now I had kind of the ultimate leverage, right? Because I had just so much money coming in. I mean, how much money can you spend, right? At that point. And that's what kind of launched off my training career, was that, saying yes to that initial $4,000 program and putting it all into application and pushing it forward. And eventually, over the next couple of years, I started helping Chet with all kinds of things. Chet Holmes, who wrote the book. And, I ended up becoming his president of training, his president of sales, co-running coaching, helping him build his consulting division and a bunch of other divisions in the company. And then eventually a man named Tony Robbins came along and took interest in the company. So I ended up doing that for Tony. And, we built the company up to about 27 million within, 5 years. And so that was kind of what got me going in the thing. And then I started applying sales optimization to Chet's and Tony's business. And what ended up happening was the revenues just started, when I first got there, they were doing like 17.8% conversion. In 4 months, they were doing 43.2% conversion across the whole team. So this was starting to generate millions and millions and millions of dollars. And they already had the marketing costs sunk in. So now this was just really pure profit at that point.
All right. So 2 questions on that. What were you doing differently than the folks who'd been coaching for Chet for years, or that you come in just like you did in telecom and suddenly you're zooming ahead of the pack?
So I treated it as a business. That's where a lot of coaches and even consultants, they think that their business is actually coaching or their business is consulting. And the reality is it's not. It's an acquisition of a client to be able to coach or consult. And so I just applied that principle to everything I was doing. So it was like, because I figured, moral obligation, I can't help this person unless I can get them to actually get into where I could actually help them. So I couldn't coach them for free, and I wouldn't, neither would the company. So it was about building a massive value for them, to show them, and creating a tremendous amount of pain through the process of actually creating that value, so that they would actually take the next step, which is go get the help. Because a lot of times entrepreneurs, just like I was when I was sitting there like, oh my gosh, just lost 60 grand. Should I stripe $4,000? Because I got to go tell my wife, hey, listen, now we're $65,000 in debt, not just 60. And so I understand those fears. I understand, and I think that the other thing, Ruben, was I understand what it's like to be an entrepreneur, because, my dad's business and the businesses that I was building, even though they were, multi-6-figure, most of the ones that I built early on, I know what it's like to have to pull your credit card out to make payroll.
Mm-hmm.
And what that feels like and how fearful it could be, or, not knowing whether or not you're going to be able to hit the numbers in a month from now. And now you got to go back to the bank and say, I'm so sorry. Right? And, I've had those conversations. So I think a couple of things happened. Number one, I treated it like a business and I applied business principles. And number two, I understood what my clientele really wanted and how they felt. So I could build massive rapport and also relate to what they were doing. So, in sales, we would call that research, right? You go out there, you look at a company, you say, okay, I'm going to learn everything I can about the company before I'm going to approach them, so I can have some familiarity and build some, trust. I did that naturally because a lot of the people that were coming through, they were all businesses to businesses, and they were small businesses and they were huge businesses. I mean, we had Intuit come through there, big companies like that. We had we had small, just startup companies coming through there, but I could relate on all kinds of levels.
Sure. You were helping them solve problems that you had dealt with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you and I sort of share that philosophy of that. That's a really easy mission because you don't just understand it intellectually, you feel it in your gut, what they're going through.
One does, especially if they've gone through it, right? Like you and I have. So, and I've always applied the same principle to coaching, which is business is very simple until we add people, right? So once we add people, it gets more complicated. But the premise of business is really simple. It's money's going to go out, money's going to come in, and there's an equal sign. So there's a plus sign in between, out plus in equals something. So if you want to thrive, you always want profit. If one wants to sort of struggle, they're going to get at a break even. If one wants to stress out, they're going to lose money. Right. And anytime I can get a company of any size, I mean, I've worked with billion-dollar corporations that were losing, $100 million a year and help them turn that around because they weren't going back to the basics, right? And so whether it's a smaller startup company or, mid-level company doing, 10 to 100 million, or whether it's a larger company, if we just go back to the basics on how to sell, how to acquire a client, how to do that more efficiently, and stay with that premise of that formula, it always works. And I'm using an absolute, but I mean it really always works when people will actually do it.
Okay, so what did you do for Tony and Chet that helped them optimize their sales and more than double their close rates?
So I looked at the first thing that people want to do in their own company is look at data or data, depending on where you come from, right? So I looked at the data, and what it told me was there are pieces missing in a process. So I'll give you an example. The sales team on the front end, the sales manager at the time was actually skewing the numbers. And I know that really, no one can ever relate to a sales manager skewing the numbers for their benefit. But they were looking at the numbers as okay and reporting numbers on what they deemed as qualified. But the reality is the company never had a system to lead score to actually deem what a lead was qualified. They were just generating tons of leads on the front end. So I went back through and I ran all the data for the last 2 years. And what I realized was a couple of different things. Number one, there were 170,000 leads never followed up on. Not once, right? And number two, that the data was being skewed and we needed a lead scoring system. So I put in a lead scoring system on the front end, not making friends with the sales manager because they didn't appreciate it. And then what I did is I started looking at all the drop points along the path of where that lead was not being followed up on, which led me to understand that even parts of the script that they had needed to be tightened up. So I went through and I did those three things on the front end, and their sales team went from a true close rate of about 12% to now a true close rate of almost 22%. Now, when you're generating 1,000 to 3,000 leads a week on the front end, that pushes a lot more volume through the next stage, right? So it's all about looking at, okay, what's happening along the client journey, the customer journey, and then optimizing those points. So the next point was, okay, they went from there into what we called a presentation, or we called it a master class. So they paid for a master class. And so I looked at all the optimization points there. I looked at what was happening in the masterclass. I looked at their refund rate. It was atrocious at the time, and I told Chet this. It was like 15.6%. And so I looked through the whole presentation and I realized, okay, at this point, they're actually making a risk reversal offer, but they were inviting the refund. So what they would say is, hey, look, if we didn't prove our worth today, if it wasn't worth at least $229, drop off the call right now, call this 800 number, and we'll refund your money. And so what I did is I took that same phrase and I said, by a show of applause, or by a, everybody, I used to use things from Tony, everybody say, if you felt that today you got tremendous value, right? And then blah, blah, blah. And what we would do is then we would quantify that value in the form of an exercise. So we would have people who were reporting, hey, I just found $27,000, or I just found $153 million. I mean, we used to have people announce these things. So we'd add it all up and we'd say, okay, on this call today, we found $342 million. Everybody agree it was worth your time today? Yes. Okay, great. Right? If you didn't feel it was worth your time, just let us know. And the refund rate went from 15.6% to under 1% within 2 weeks. Now, here's not the refund rate wasn't really the big deal because we're refunding $229. But 1 in 4 converted into a $2,500 a month coaching program that lasted 12 months. Right? So if we were dropping 100 people a week out of that funnel, 25 of them now would go into coaching, and a percentage, about 20% of them, would actually buy a program that was $35,000 or more. So if you think about, okay, we're creating the push on the front end, getting the close rate from 12% to 20, almost 22%, then now we're increasing the conversion rate as well as the refund rate, lowering that, and you start looking, because on the front end they were doing 17.6% conversion. We got that to 43.2% conversion. So if you look at the whole customer journey, it just pushed a whole lot of volume into these higher level programs. And we were selling $250,000 to $500,000 consulting packages on top of this. So it was like there was a lot of money that just really flooded in pretty quickly within the first year of me optimizing everything.
So it's kind of like the Army days. You didn't lie, but you took credit for the value you delivered, and you made sure people knew who was delivering the value.
Yes.
And if somebody was really like, no, this sucked, I want a refund, they get a refund.
Right.
But you're not encouraging them to say, gosh, this sucked.
No, and that it's kind of like when a salesperson would ask a question, to close a sale, and they say, not very confidently, would you like to do this, or do we need to talk about something else? They're inviting the objection to come up at that point, or they're inviting the person to think about something else when they wanted to buy in the first place. They just want somebody to be ultra confident in helping them make that purchasing decision at that point.
I think that's a great point, because so many of us, we really want to do right by our clients and we don't want to force them into the wrong thing. And so our reticence comes off as lack of confidence. Mm-hmm. And so people are like, I don't want you to take me to the top of Mount Everest. You don't sound confident.
No.
Right? The person taking you to the top of Mount Everest tells you what you need to do, but is damn confident that they know what they're doing. Right?
Right. Absolutely.
So go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
So this is just an amazing story. So many cool adventures along the way, and we could go on for hours. At least I could. Maybe you can't. I have wine, so I have an advantage. But
hey, I have water, so we can go on.
If you could sum this up for folks who are now doing their B2B consulting or coaching business, what do they need to be doing or not doing when it comes to their sales?
They need to focus on the rules of the game. Like if you're doing B2B sales or doing coaching or consulting sales, it's all about client acquisition. And so how do you do that the most effective way? And how do you do it the most efficient way? Because the reality is that a lot of, I'll stay with coaches or consultants. A lot of them, they're not reinvesting back into processes. They're working tactically most of the time versus strategically. So, I talk to a lot of consultants and they're like, well, I did $400,000 last year or something like that. And I go, that's great. How much of that did you keep? They're like, well, I always want to keep at least 95%. I'm like, well, okay. And they go, I don't know how to get beyond $400,000. And I'd be like, you're not going to with keeping 95%, right? Because what they're doing is they're limiting the ability to actually scale their business because they haven't worked on the efficiencies. And the reason they're not working on the efficiencies is because they're not willing to give up a component of that money to get the leverage in their business.
They're not investing in their own business the way they're probably telling their clients to.
Oh, it's exactly what they're doing. A lot of them are telling them, look, you got to do this, you got to do that. And by the way, they're truthful and they really mean it, right? It's a total play of honesty, and the client does it and they actually get results. But they're afraid because they're coming from a place, which I find most of the time stems from childhood, right, on the way that they're supposed to be. You know, 400, if you make $400,000, you know, some people come from families that say, that's way more money than you will ever need. So you're not supposed to make $1 million. You're not supposed to be up there making $1 million and netting out, you know, 60% on your consulting business. That's for the other people. So they put these limitations on themselves. A lot of times it comes back to their own decisions based on their thought process.
That's a great point. It's not something that's come up repeatedly in this interview that I really resonates with me, because it's something I backed into. I didn't learn it when I was a kid. It took me a long time. But this notion of I have to put in a certain amount of effort to connect with people and be helpful to people. And then the wheels of karma will turn and these people will be helpful to me. But I can't just sit there in my yoga pose expecting the karma to rain down on me if I don't put in the initial effort. And it seems like this is what you did in music. This is what you did in the army. This is what you did in the telecom firm. This is what you've done again and again. You've gone out and you've made that initial effort. You've proven that you're out there to help people. And then a lot of people want to help you. Is that a fair summary?
That is a fair summary. I would add one piece. When you tell them you want the help, right? So you can build all the karma that you're talking about. You can do everything, and some will trickle back to you. But if you really want to expand and you want leverage in that process, then you must tell them what you want from them, because otherwise they don't know.
Right.
Right. So this is a big mistake that people make in, you know, gaining referrals, which is one of the easier things to do in the world, which people are very poor at doing because they're not framing it through the process. That's the expectation. So, you know, and then they're not asking. So they have what we would call maybe a passive program, right? Occasionally they'll get a lead back and forth from somebody else. But if they had what we would call more of an active program or, you know, a proactive program, then they would be seeding for referrals and letting people know right through the process that, you know, they would really appreciate if they're pulling off what they need to pull off for them, and they trust them enough that if they would please have the expectation that, you know, could I have 3 people or 4 people or 5 people, right? I mean, if you do referrals correctly, you could have referrals for years going on. And so we want to tell them the expectation, and we want to set the frame for that expectation. And when you do that, once you do the karma thing and you do the right thing by people, that's when you're going to get the exponential growth out of that process.
Yeah, that's a great point. And if you haven't, check out the episode with Stacey Brown Randall. It's a whole episode on referrals. Highly recommend that. And I think something that came up there and that I see time and time again is someone will say, well, I'm a coach. I coach business owners. Who do you know that you can refer me to? And I'm like, well, I know 20 business coaches, probably more. Mm-hmm. How do I know whether to refer you or someone else? Because I would love to make that introduction to the business owner who needs you. But I'm not going to introduce them to 20 people because that's a waste of everyone's time. So right. Who do I introduce you to? And if you have a great answer to that question, when I find that person, I'm like, great, you need to talk to Doug. But right. If you're like, well, any business coach that has a business, then I'm like, that doesn't help me at all, right? Mm-hmm. You got to occupy some kind of space in someone's mind, whether it's a prospect or a partner, so that they say, this is where I tell people to talk to Doug.
Right. Have you ever been to Barnes & Noble, Ruben, the bookstore?
Not since this whole COVID thing started, but prior to that, yes, right, frequently.
So I love Barnes & Noble only because I just love bookstores, right? But when you go into Barnes & Noble and you look at the business section or the marketing section, right, which I frequently would do when I go there, and I haven't been there since COVID kicked in either. But when I used to do that, how do you know what book to pick off the shelf? Right? Unless you have some indication or indicator of what you're looking for. I mean, come on, there's 15 books on the same topic. Who stands out, right? So it's the same thing. And this is where, again, going back to shameless promotion, you're not going to lie, but you don't want to differentiate. Jack Trout wrote a book called Differentiate and Die. I like the book, but I would say be different. You got to stand out from all of the other 20 business coaches. So if you're not giving clarity, you know, like in my case, I'm looking for a company that's usually doing 5 million or above, generally 8 million and above with 5 salespeople plus, who is in a growth mode, who wants to grow beyond, who's stuck and they're not really sure why they're stuck. See, now that is a lot more specific than saying, hey, I just look for companies that are doing over $5 million, right? So for your listeners out there, if the more specific they are, hey, I want to date a gal who's 5'8", blue eyes, dark hair, comes from whatever, Irish, heritage or whatever, that will help that person who you want referrals from to be able to really scope down and go, Margaret Ann, she's single, that type of thing. And the other thing is having the courage to actually ask.
Yep. I know for me, I despite being a consultant and coaching people on this stuff, it's always been hard for me, right? Because you don't want to limit yourself. Humans have a scarcity mindset. We're wired that way. And the thing that really helped me overcome that personally was thinking, do I love hard sales cycles where I'm battling constantly? Or do I like easy sales cycles where the person's like, come on, let's get started? And I hate selling. So I like easy sales cycles. And the more specific you can be, the more you get the right people, and you, just as importantly, keep the wrong people out so you don't waste time with them. And so for me, that was the psychological trick that I used on myself to say, actually having a super specific niche is really fun and makes life so much better. And you're not missing out. You're actually enjoying a whole lot more. And I think that's the thing that they're always, oh, what about that guy who's only $4 million? Right. Like you can still say yes to that person if you want, but if you've wasted a whole bunch of time on companies that are too small or clients that are prospects that have some characteristic that just makes it a struggle, even if you land the deal, it's a pain in the ass. Like, why don't we start with your favorite client and work backwards and getting more of them?
And you'll be happier, right? And I've noticed, like with your software, for example, your SaaS product, right? You specifically have niched that into people who want to communicate better. Consultants, like when I look through it, you're making the job easier for a consultant or a coach because, you get proposals in there, but it's not just a proposal generator. It's an actual value added thing for any consultant because it cuts proposal time down from, I know guys who put proposals together, take it 3-4 hours, you're cutting it down into, 15 minutes or less. From what I saw, and it's really elegant and upscale, and I would be happy to use that to represent people that I'm sending it out to. So, but you've niched down into that particular space as well in the software, from what I can see, and that doesn't mean that other people couldn't use the software,
right?
But that just means that it's you're becoming more of the expert in that particular market, so that when people come there, they go, wow, I want to know more, versus, okay, this is something, at least that was my experience when I first looked at it. And so I agree with you 100%. I could coach anybody, but the reality is, are they best served by me coaching anybody or anything? Because I have expertise in certain areas, in certain fields, and those, whether they're narrow and there's only 3,000 people that you could actually, market to. The reality is, when you market to those 3,000 people and you are deemed the expert, price objections seem to go away at that point.
Right. Well, thanks for the kind words about the software. And I'm going to use that as a way to be, what am I supposed to be doing? Shameless promotion?
Shameless promotion. Yeah.
Shameless promotion. Check out Mimiran.com, MIMIRAN.com. It's CRM with lead gen and proposal automation for the consultant or coach who loves serving clients but hates selling. So there's that. And you're right. Like, I've had random Fortune 500 people use the software and various other bigger companies, but it's not really the right fit. So will I work with? Sure. And sometimes it's really fun and cool, but it's not my tribe. And I have to go through a sales cycle and legal review and all this other pain in the ass stuff that I don't really enjoy. Right. Whereas the people who are in my tribe are like, oh, finally, you get it. Someone here who gets me. And I always tell people, because like I'm basically solving my problem that I had when I was a consultant. Like, pick a fight and have a point of view about the stuff that you care about. And the people who agree with you are going to come talk to you. The people who think you're crazy are going to stay away, but they weren't going to be your customers anyway, right? So everyone wins.
Right. Yeah, most of the time that's the case. And sometimes those people that you have a contrarian point of view to what they are originally used to, that'll actually spark interest as well, because they want to know why you're different at that point.
Right. So, if we could kind of sum up what you're talking about, it is go make these connections, deliver value to them. What do you say to the people who have trouble with that initial step? Like, oh my God, I get how if I had the courage to go call up all these bands and people that I know and schools that I know need musical instruments, that would be great. But I freaking hate picking up the phone and selling. How do they get over that initial hesitancy?
So, firstly, get help, right? Talk to guys like you or me, right? Who can help them, bridge that gap of fear, because a lot of times it's just fear, and
it's all fear.
Yeah, and you, as one must do, they must make a decision that, okay, I'm gonna get past this no matter what, right? Because if they don't do that, then they're gonna stay in fear. But the interesting thing about fear is when you can show some successes in the process to somebody, and it really wasn't that scary or that hard, right? Then all of a sudden their confidence level goes up, and then you can bring it up a little more and a little more. It reminds me of so I have two daughters, as you know. One just turned 21 on Sunday, which was awesome, but I am feeling older, and I have one that's 19. And when when the girls were younger, they were very much into hockey. And so my youngest daughter was like, I think I want to be the first female general manager of the National Hockey League. So I said to him, well, why don't you just cold call the general managers of the National Hockey League and introduce yourself. And so, to your point, there was some resistance, right? Because they're literally, 12 years old, right? 13 years old. And so they're like, Dad, I just don't feel comfortable doing that. And I said, well, what if you did this? And I gave them like a little script, right? And they said, well, that isn't too bad. I said, okay. Well, can you help me do the research? So we did some research, and then I left it alone. And so here's the story. They blind emailed, and then they cold called on top of the email. So they sent an email and then cold called on top of that. And the pitch was kind of like, hey, I'm 13, 14 years old. I'm really interested in doing this. I want to be the first NHL, female general manager. I've done some research on you. I really respect how you got to where you are and where you are. And I was wondering if we could have a conversation. It was pretty much like that. I didn't know they were reaching out. I just gave them the idea, right? So they reached out to all the teams, and they got literally 3 general managers who responded: the Philadelphia Flyers, the Boston Bruins, and the Calgary Flames. Well, it turns out that the Calgary Flames guy actually offered to mentor my youngest daughter in this process, right? So, look, if a 13 and 14-year-old can do this, and they were in fear, then anybody can do this. It's just a matter of knowing the process. So get help. Talk to people like yourself, myself, who know how to do this and know how to transfer the skill. So that's simple.
That's a great point. And it also kind of plays back into our notion about having a position and a niche, right? Because there's only 30 teams that they can reach out to.
Exactly.
It wasn't like I'm going to be a general manager of a sports team or general manager of a department store. And it was like very specific. And if for some reason it didn't work, you could always try a different niche, but they had a great place to start. And I think that's awesome. Well, that's great. Well, thanks, Doug, so much for your time. This has been wonderful. And I think it really illustrates that you don't have to have a whole bunch of fancy rocket science, but you do have to take some action. And if for some reason you're stuck taking action, get someone to help you.
It's not that difficult. The challenge is, for most of us, our educational system growing up taught us not to ask for help.
Yes, very true.
If you think about it, if you collaborated on a test back when we were going to school, they called that cheating. Right. And we were penalized for that.
Yep.
But then when you get out into the real world, especially into business, you have to cheat.
You have to collaborate. Let's say you have to collaborate.
You have to collaborate, which was called cheating in the early days.
Right. But that's very different from cheating in the business world.
That's true. That's true. Thanks for the correction. And, so that collaboration is really, really important because you can't know everything. And
asking for help is so important, right? Because there isn't this defined curriculum in business. So if you're stuck, you can't just look at the answer key. You gotta raise your hand and get some help from somebody.
And honestly, that's how I met Tony Robbins, by asking for help.
Right.
So I asked somebody, hey, how do I get here? And they said, well, do this. And I said, okay. And I did that. And then I ended up in a room with Tony Robbins, 200 people, right? So that's how I get to meet the man. So it's a great idea to ask for help. Like when I go to seminars or I go to any type of thing, I literally am the guy who asks all the questions that no one will dare ask, because I don't care if people think I'm not the smartest guy in the room. But what I have found by doing that is people think I'm the smartest guy in the room. So ask for help. There's no shame in doing that. And don't let our past scripting hold you from moving forward. You could start from today and move forward. And, but get help from people who understand, like Ruben, like myself, or others. But definitely don't stay in that place where you think one has to think that to be successful, they got to come up with all the answers. A mentor of mine once taught me this. He was worth $350 million at the time, so I very much listened to him. But he said, Doug, there's not a lot of wow thinking in the world. There's a lot of good thinking. You just have to tap into the good thinking, and you'll eventually come up with a wow idea by yourself. But for the most part, everything's been thought of at this point.
Right. We kind of have this mythology that businesses get dreamt up in a garage by someone tinkering or coding or whatever by themselves. Right. And that's not how it happens at all.
Nope. Even Steve Jobs had an investor right from the beginning. Right. So, they did do it in the garage, but the reality is, if they didn't have the cash infusion that came in from the beginning, we probably wouldn't have the Apple we have today.
Well, and Steve Jobs was the guy who called up, I believe it was the CEO of HP at the time, and said, hey, can you get me some parts?
Yeah.
He was a teenager. It's just like your daughters. So Doug, if people need help from you, where can they find you?
They can either go to Business Success Factors or send me an email at doug@businesssuccessfactors.com, or send an email to YouMatter, YouMatter, MATTER, at businesssuccessfactors.com. They can call me at 603-595-0303. They can also get me at, I also have another company called High Velocity Training, which is YouMatter at High Velocity Training. That will get to me as well.
Awesome. And if you're riding your bike or driving your car right now, don't worry. All these links will be in the show notes. Doug, thanks so much for joining me. Cheers.
Cheers. And thank you, Ruben, for having me on.
Thanks for listening. Did something in this episode or a past episode help you out? I'd love to hear about it. Send comments, questions, or ideas for future episodes to hello@salesfornerds.io. And of course, iTunes reviews are super helpful for getting the word out. So if you've got a few moments to put one of those up, I'd really appreciate it. If you've got a friend who'd benefit from one of these episodes, send a link. If you've got a friend who wouldn't benefit from one of the episodes, but you just haven't talked to in a while, this is a great excuse to pick up the phone and give them a call. Of course, if you're looking for a whole new take on CRM for solo consultants, along with proposal templates, lead magnet ideas, free positioning tools, and more, check it out at Mimiran.com. That's MIMIRAN.com. Again, thanks for listening, and until next time.